Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens is the story of a young man and his sister who have to make a new life for themselves after their father dies and their mother becomes completely dependent on them. They experience quite a lot of bad luck, but also quite a lot of good luck. And funnily enough, it's the good luck which makes a lot of readers struggle to suspend disbelief. I have a longer video essay on coincidence and luck in this novel, which I'm going to find a way to link here, but this video is more of a review. When I review and rate books, I like to use a 5P model adapted from BookGabber, a friend from my BookTok days. The 5Ps are purpose, plot, etc., prose, personal, and position. Purpose. Why was this book written? What is its greater meaning? Plot, etc. Do the elements of the novel help convey this greater meaning? Are they successful in doing so? Prose. How does the author use language? Personal. Of course, what did I think of it? Did I enjoy my reading experience? And position. What is its significance in the greater culture? I give it a score of up to 5 points for each element, and then at the end, I get the average. So it gets a rating over 5. And I predict that Nicholas Nickleby is going to end up with something like 3.2. Let's begin with purpose. Why did Dickens write this novel? He wrote it to entertain the masses and to sneak in some social and political commentary. It's interesting to think of the Victorian serial as the 19th century telenovela. And Dickens was particularly good at bringing people together. I have not looked up the source again, but I remember reading that 1 in 10 Victorians were Dickens readers, which is pretty incredible. Now, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, especially when it's as good in quality as we get in Nicholas Nickleby, but it also means there was no exploration of a greater theme. Nicholas and Kate are pretty average as heroes and heroines go, and they're often outshone by the minor characters who are funny, sometimes tragic, sometimes infuriating satires of Victorian society that I think are still pretty relevant to us now, even if they don't speak as directly to us as they did to the original readers. Through these characters, Dickens is also able to moralize without actually moralizing. And I think it's a shame that our vocabulary of Dickensian characters is not as big as it used to be. I want to have a short on that soon because there was a Dickens allusion in one of my favorite novels from childhood that I did not fully understand until I finally read Nicholas Nickleby, and I'd like to share that. Plot, etc. And this refers to all the elements: character, setting, voice. I'm going to focus mostly here on plot and character. As mentioned earlier, the plot relies very heavily on coincidence and luck, and that ultimately does not make it feel as satisfying as it should. There is at least one happy ending for one of the characters and one comeuppance for another character, which do not feel earned because they do not come as a direct result of the actions of the characters that we have seen. I mean, the comeuppance, it's implied that it was due to past actions, but not those which took place on stage in the story. And so they feel like they just happened. And that's not good plotting, I'm afraid. As for the characters themselves, they tend to be flat rather than round, and that includes the main characters of Nicholas and Kate. Since they are the heroes and they do have to overcome things thrown in their way, it does not bother me so much. There is some growth that we can trace for them, Where it did bother me was the character of Smike, who is Nicholas's friend and who is never anything more than a sidekick. Like, I don't mind when the minor characters who are there for the satire are as flat and as two-dimensional and as exaggerated as possible for the sake of the lesson. But when it comes to a main character, I do look a bit deeper. So when it comes to plot and the other elements, I find this kind of average and I give it 2.5 points. Prose. Charles Dickens is a master of prose. He's one of the best writers in the English language ever, and Nicholas Nickleby was a joy to read. Even the boring parts were a pleasure, and I especially liked the psychological and social commentary in the narration, a lot of which I jotted down in my commonplace book. Let me share a random example. Youth is not prone to contemplate the darkest side of a picture it can shift at will. Why, yes, that perfectly captures youthful enthusiasm. Perhaps the only really poor thing I can say about Dickens' prose is that it's pretty obvious he was paid by the word. For prose, I give Nicholas Nickleby 4.5 stars. Personal. Did I enjoy Nicholas Nickleby? Yes, I did. Though there were some parts I enjoyed a little less than others. For instance, I thought it was more than a little indulgent of Dickens to have Nicholas and Smike spend a season with a traveling theater group. It did not feel like an organic part of the story where his character was being developed or the plot was being developed and given more complexity. It felt like time away from the story rather than part of the story. And it does not feel that way when Nicholas is in Yorkshire with the odious Mr. Squeers. That feels like a development of his character and the story. So it was fun to read about Mr. Crummles and his family and everyone else in the theater group, though it also felt like an extended commercial break of sorts, an ad for Victorian theater. For pleasure or for personal, I would give Nicholas Nickleby 3 points. Position. Where does Nicholas Nickleby stand in the greater world of literature, and what is its cultural significance? I realize now what a big question that is for me to answer. And if there's someone here who has read more Dickens or more Victorian literature, feel free to chime in if you feel my rating here is wrong. But how I see it is that Nicholas Nickleby, since it was written by one of the masters of English literature, is automatically a classic and a well-written one, despite some issues that I mentioned before. However, it was written pretty early in his career, and he was, in my opinion, still honing the powers that would come to full force in novels that came out about 10 years later, like David Copperfield, Great Expectations, Bleak House, to name 3. He seems to be mostly having fun here and collecting a paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with that, just as there's nothing wrong with books that are written primarily for entertainment. It just means that here we have kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's not one of his best, but it's still very good. On the other hand, it's very good, but it's so far away from being one of his best that in that respect, it's kind of average. So looking at it in that way, I would give it, for position, 2.5 stars. Adding up the points in all 5 categories, getting their average, and rounding up to the 10th place, we have a rating of 3.1 out of 5, which is not so far off from my original rating of 3.2 based on vibes. And it's nice to think that the vibes and the thoughtful consideration lay very close to each other. Well, thank you for watching my video. If you have your own thoughts on Nicholas Nickleby and your own thoughts on the 5 Ps used to come up with a rating, please let me know. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on it, and I welcome all opinions.